Okay, so I'm back later the same day. I'm going to continue our discussion of how this got to us. So if you can, put yourself in a position, rewind the clock 3,000 years ago with no computers, with no cell phones, with no printers, with no typewriters, with no real like ink and stylus. Put yourself with in a pre-electric agrarian, maybe just beginning Iron Age society, where or Bronze Age, perhaps even, where the resources aren't as plentiful, where most people don't read. We might be going back to there, um, given the recent developments in our society, but we um, we definitely live a much different life. So imagine, instead of all of these, pages, imagine a scroll or an animal hide, that's been written on. That a scribe has literally, and you write Hebrew from right to left. It's not left to right like we read it. Hebrew is a right to left written, and reading. That's how it goes. There are also, interestingly enough, no vowels in the written Hebrew language. When a person is etching down or writing Hebrew, the vowels are just kind of understood in between the consonants. And so, for instance, the ancient name of God, Yahweh, is written YHWH, and we come up with Yahweh through, it's not, there's not an A or an E in there, or an H. There is an H, but you don't have this pronunciation guide. Is kind of understood, and so that's interesting as well. When you go to translation, you're dealing with all consonants, and the spoken word is a little different than the written word. And so imagine, rather than having a nice, tightly bound, all together collected works of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the Pentateuch, the New Testament, there are these scrolls floating around there. And think even, the Dead Sea Scrolls, where we get this immaculately preserved. Or I say immaculately, it's also, there have been a lot of, um, it's definitely biodegraded over time, but you get this fairly well preserved look at, okay, this is what it actually was. And so they're expensive, very expensive to produce. They're not produced by people who are just living out on the land farming. Typically, they're produced by the scribal class, which is an upper class, which is able to read and write. Um, and so it's interesting that the oral tradition then becomes written. Like I mentioned in the previous video, you know, most likely are between 1000 BCE and 586 BCE. The Babylonian exile. And so you have a lot of the early texts are written down then. One of the earliest actual, what they believe the earliest scrolls. So you don't have a nice, neat Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers. You don't have a nice, progression or flow. You have these floating scrolls. And so actually one of the earliest written works is likely Job. Job is actually probably written down. I'm being a little bit liberal in my dating. There's arguments. It's 1000 is a little bit too late. It's more recent than that. 1000 BC. It's more like, and Job probably, some scholars put that around the middle 800s. And so Job, the image of the suffering servant, emerges, and then, reemerges with Jesus later on. But at least for people who are Christians. So yeah, it's not a nice, neat thing. There are things floating around out there, and so it's not just like we imagine it. I think I'll stop there. I don't want to go into too much detail. It's a good way to segue into the next portion.